Right, thanks everyone. We'll make a start in a minute. It is a really long session, and I've spoken with both Adrian and Mark who are presenting today, and some really, really technical stuff there. So we're going to record it, so you can play back on others that haven't managed to get here. We'll be able to see it as well. As ever, we aim to be about an hour long. But we've put in an hour and a half, so we'll finish the presentations in roughly an hour, and then we will
Is that room for you, David?
mute because I'm getting quite a bit of background noise. I haven't muted myself, have I?
You're right.
So yeah, we'll record it. An hour for the sessions, half an hour at the end if those who want to stay on want to ask questions or chat through what they've heard. It's all been recorded, so you get to see it. We'll send the slides at the end as well after the meeting. In the meantime, if there's anything you want to, anything that grabs you, any questions you have, stick it in the chat, and we'll feed that back at the end as we have a discussion. We're going to do two sessions. Adrian's going to start and do about 30 minutes on the policy paper. And then Mark Catlow is going to do some more technical work around business rates and the business rates policy papers. So there'll be some, I've spoken with both the guys, it's some really heavy stuff, really complex stuff you're going to hear this morning, but all important, with us being just a week and a day, I think, away from the settlement. So hopefully be really useful to you. But without further ado, Adrian, I'll pass across to you.
Great stuff. Thank you, Dan. I think it's the second webinar we've done on the policy statement. The first one was just really shortly after, kind of going through what was in the policy statement, how we were going to model it. We didn't really see any of the results, or not much of the full results from that. And for those of you who subscribe to our model and our service, you'll know that we've issued a few iterations. The last one, and I think probably pretty much the final one, or near final one, was the one that we issued last Wednesday. But there has been a fairly rocky road. Dan's talked about the road forward, but it's a little bit of a rocky road as we try to understand what CLG are doing. It's not always been easy to get under the bonnet and understand exactly what is going to be in the settlement. But this presentation today is kind of taking you through what's in the model, what that looks like, how things have changed, really comparing our last model following the June update. So we issued a model back in July, which is kind of like our final version of modeling the June consultation paper. And then we're now comparing our December model, which models the policy statement, and looking at the change between the two, because there have been some really important changes. And I will be circulating a model after this webinar, which helps you understand what the movements have been and try to interrogate what's happened since the summer compared to now, because that will help you to understand what's changed, but also give you a bit more confidence about what's in the model and why things have moved, and why things have moved in your favour or moved against you. It's the flavour of some of the individual things that have changed, but we'll look at each of those in more detail. And then I'll try and illustrate what that looks like by drawing on a few individual local authority kind of archetypes, really, to show you what happens for, certain types of Met, certain types of unitary, outer London boroughs, districts, counties, etc. And then finishing up with, what are we expecting over the next few weeks, and some lobbying recommendations, if that's the sort of thing that you think you need to do. So starting off with, what does the model look like in terms of forecast changes in core spending power over the next 3 years, from our model, looking at this at class level. And this seems to be the currency that officials are talking to authorities about for core spending power, the 3-year movement, either in percentage terms or in cash terms. And some of you, I think, will have been given those 3-year numbers for you to compare and check against. So we understand this is in line broadly with MHCLG's modelling in terms of the rough shape of the outcomes. And we can see here that Inner London is still well below the average, 16.6% average over the next 3 years. Inner London way below that, only 6% cash increase. Outer London, though, doing incredibly well. It was the best of the bunch last time in the summer. It's even more so this time, plus 27%. Met's doing pretty well as well, plus 22%. The county authorities, the shire counties and unitaries doing less well than average. Shire districts doing much less well than average. And you'll see that combined fire authorities, Met fire authorities, they're pretty much at their real terms floor or slightly above it. So that's kind of the broad shape of it. If we look at the upper tier authorities and look at the winners and losers or the gainers over the next 3 years based on the latest modelling, you can see there at the far left, you've got some different sorts of authorities. You've got some of the big metropolitan authorities, Birmingham, Manchester, having some of the biggest increases. Some of the outer London boroughs too, Hounslow, the one we've focused on there, but there's also Newham and others too, Brent too, quite a few outer London boroughs there. The one with the biggest increase in our modelling for the next 3 years is Luton, over 50% increase in core spending power over 3 years. But some really big increases for some of those larger outer London boroughs, unitaries, Mets with more urban characteristics gaining from council tax equalisation. Then as we move down through the range, pick out some authorities like Warwickshire and Lancashire, some of the biggest increases, well, the biggest increases for county authorities is Lincolnshire, they're slightly below that, Durham as well. Hackney in London Borough with a slightly above average increase over the next 3 years. And then if we move down a bit further, you'll see places like Rochdale and Blackpool doing kind of around the average, but not around the average, I'd say. And then on the far right, some interesting authorities in that grouping. There are some metropolitan authorities who we would have expected to do a lot better. Sunderland, South Tyneside and Knowsley, but for various reasons, they're not doing particularly well. Then we've got some rural authorities that are doing particularly badly, and I think remoteness has really affected these authorities. Westmoreland is one, Cornwall slightly further up the scale, but Westmoreland and Furness has definitely done very badly. And then on the far right, the ones that have done by far the least well are places like Surrey and Windsor and Maidenhead, who've got very large tax bases and low needs, Richmond too, and then some inland London boroughs who are losing very heavily, Westminster, Hammersmith and Fulham, Wandsworth, etc., etc. So that's the kind of the broad shape of it from the upper tier authorities' point of view. Slightly simpler when we look at the lower tier for shire districts only. We see some authorities, some shire districts doing particularly well: Harlow, Norwich, Epsom and Ewell, Basingstoke and Dean, places that actually have got quite big urban characteristics and have gained a lot from the temporary housing, the TARNF. A big change there for them, and then a lot at the -5% funding floor. Northwest Leicestershire is the one we'll track all the way through it, but that does not tell the whole story for lots of shire district councils. Then if we look at the gains and losses between the June proposals and the November, or between our summer model and our latest model for upper tier authorities, you can see there on the left hand side some really big increases for in London boroughs, outer London boroughs, and a selection of Mets and like Birmingham, Manchester, Sheffield, etc. Big increases in funding compared to the summer, and also places like Luton. We saw they had the biggest increase, and they've had that part of that is because there was a big increase between the summer and now. A lot of more county authorities in the middle we see a bit more static. Warwickshire, Bath and North East Somerset, for instance. And then on the right hand side, the losing authorities relative to the summer. An interesting mix here. We've got some like Westmoreland and Furness and Cornwall who have lost heavily from remoteness. Interestingly, we've also got some authorities like Blackpool, Knowsley and Middlesbrough losing, and we'll see they're losing a lot from the children's RNF, and then places like Northamptonshire and Trafford as well. For shire district councils, it's kind of the other way around from what we saw previously, which is that the ones that have gained the most are places like Northwest Leicestershire, Dartford, South Cambridgeshire, Hinckley and Bosworth, Cherwell. As we'll see, they're places that have got a huge amount of business rate growth, and they've gained massively from that, the way that the BRS income has been taken into account in the model. On the other end of the scale, the places that have lost are places like Norwich, for instance, who we saw previously. Actually, they were doing relatively well compared to in terms of 3-year core spending power increase. But of course, this just shows you the movement between the June and the November modelling. The overall picture is that Norwich is still gaining. So another way of looking at the changes that have happened since the summer that were proposed in the policy statement is to look at the share of core spending power, so excluding the impact of the quantum change, which has been quite an important driver of change within our model. And you can see here in terms of funding share, the biggest increases are in outer London, but also in London too, and in the metropolitan area. So the changes that have come through have very much shifted resources towards London and towards the Mets. So what are those changes that we saw in the policy statement? And this is a brief recap of what they are. So they decided to use the 2002 based subnational population projections rather than the more recent 1 year mid-2024 population estimates, using the new 2025 IMD in the foundation formula and the resources adjustment, as well as, really importantly, using the new EDACI in the children's RNF, removing remoteness from all the area cost adjustments with the exception of adult social care, reducing the weighting for non-resident population within the foundation formula, increasing the cap on the distance for homeschool transport from 20 to 50 miles, and then continuing the recovery grant payments from upper tier to lower tier authorities, and of course also making the change on the way that business rates income is taken into account. And as we'll see, there have been some changes in the quantum that we've used to model and tax-based forecasts as well. It's not new money, but it is a change in our interpretation and understanding of what, and also change in the decisions that ministers have made since the spending review. So starting off by looking at the quantum, this is the thing that's been hardest to model over the last 2 or 3 weeks. And what we've got here is that the core spending power that we were looking at based on the 2025 spending review, I think that what's happened is that we understand there's more funding available from the spending review than we first anticipated. And you'll recall back in September we issued an amendment to our model where you could take different assumptions about council tax, and that would our default setting was that there was grant funding increased by 2029 of 2.3 billion, but with a lower council tax assumption that would increase to 3.3 billion. So there would have been a further £1 billion within the settlement, depending on what council tax assumptions have been made within the spending review. There's also more rolled in business rate income than we had anticipated or assumed. We had assumed just shy of 1.5 billion. So we were just taking into account the post-levy retained rates for the 50% scheme. But it now looks, well, we know now there'll be a further £900 million rolling in from the business rate pooling and pilot gains and from the above baseline cap compensation funding. So a total of 2.4 billion. So there is an increase in quantum within our model now compared to the summer of around 1.9 billion, which is based on what we now understand to be or anticipate to be more grant funding within core spending power, and also a higher roll in as well. So this, as I said, it's not necessarily new money, it's just money that hadn't been, on which a decision hadn't been made or on which the decision hadn't been communicated, and it's us trying to uncover what the understanding is about what's in there. But of course there is still some uncertainty. We're a week out from the provisional settlement. There will still be decisions, I'm sure, that are being taken, and MHCLG is still working on their own modelling, so things will move, and we don't have a full picture about what's in that quantum and how the modelling will work. So just illustrating that change in quantum, as we said, we're assuming an extra £1 billion in funding by year 3. We're assuming a higher roll-in by £900 million, and we're also assuming some slightly higher index or projection values for tax base as well. So there is more resource within the model now compared to the summer. The biggest increase in terms of quantum is Shire counties, but quite a lot of that is because of council tax rather than anything else. And then next to that, metropolitan districts authorities with the largest increase in quantum. In terms of how that's funded, we see different shares of that funding increase coming from council tax. It's relatively high in county unitaries and Shire counties, 93 and 81% respectively. It's lower in Mets and Outer London, around 42%. The figures for Inner London and Shire districts are skewed because there's so much floor funding payments within their settlement, and it's difficult to, calculate those figures on a comparable basis. So overall, about 65% of the increase in core spending power over the next 3 years will come from council tax, with a larger share of that coming from county areas than from London or from Met areas. One of the key changes, and possibly the most important change compared to the summer, is the change in the revised weighted relative needs formulas. A whole range of different changes there, but the biggest increase in those weighted RNFs comes from goes to the outer London boroughs, unless quite just a bit behind that to in London boroughs. We talked about the changes for that, but big changes as a result of the new IMD, and also particularly from IDACI. And then losses in county areas, particularly for county unitaries, you see there because of the removal of remoteness, and a switch in funding share between districts and counties, with the foundation formula share being increased for counties and reduced for districts. And we'll pull some of these figures out later, but there have been some surprising reductions in weighted RNF for some high need unitaries or Mets, places like Blackpool, Knowsley, Middlesbrough, places that you'd expected to have done well from the funding reforms, and actually they do overall, but they have lost out since the summer because of some of these changes in the revised weighted RNFs. And this is one of probably the biggest mover within that, the children's relative needs formula. So it now uses the new IDACI, which takes into account housing costs. And you see some really, really significant gains here for some outer London boroughs, in particular places like Brent, Hounslow, etc. But also some of those places that we've mentioned before as having big increases in funding compared to the summer, Luton, Birmingham in particular. So we were expecting some big increases for London as soon as the IDACI took housing costs into account. I think some of the increases for places like Luton, Birmingham, Oldham and Rochdale possibly a little bit more unexpected, but these are some pretty big uplifts in the children's RNF as a result of using this new IDACI within there, and some big reductions at the other end of the scale as well. Both the two Northamptonshires losing quite significantly from the new children's RNF, but also, as I mentioned, some very high need unitaries and Mets, places like Blackpool, Middlesbrough, North East Lincolnshire, and Knowsley as well. So those places really quite badly hit by the new IDACI in the children's RNF. Then I mentioned the new measurement of the business rate income. Essentially, the big change that government's made that we weren't particularly expecting was that they have included business rate pooling gains and business rate 100% pilot gains. And the big impact here is on districts, because they've decided to allocate the gains from pools, the levy gains from pools, to the tariff authorities within those pools in a proportionate way to their levy. So in essence, if you're a high growth district council in a pool, you've gained really quite significantly in terms of that you've got a much higher starting point from in the new funding system. And you can see that the gain overall we estimate is a shift of about £130 million towards shire district councils. And if you look at other classes of authority, it's not a huge issue in itself, but it is important at the margins. I think it's important in terms of fairness and technical quality of this new settlement. But for those district councils who are gaining from this, the gains are really, really quite significant. I think that's the wrong scale there, but North West Leicestershire is the authority that, in our estimates, has gained the most from this new business rate income measure. We estimate they've gained by 8.8 million as a result of this change. Other very high growth district councils are just behind that: Cherwell, Dartford, Harborough, Rugby, Newark and Sherwood, all places that have got very, very high levels of business rate growth, and we're in a pool in 25-26. So some really big increases in funding for those authorities. And I know from the initial responses I got from those authorities when we'd first put the business rate income into our model, their numbers look quite different for 26, 27 onwards than they did in our previous, in the summer version of the model, much, much higher. Recovery grant was one of the more controversial changes that were proposed, and we've modelled what the impacts would be, continuing the £600 million recovery grant over the next 3 years. And that results, as you'd expect, in a big increase in funding for metropolitan districts, 181 million, although it's not that much different from the increase from the business rate income for shire districts. So proportionately, it's actually not as big a boost to Mets as the business rate income adjustment is to districts. So it has moved money, but it's maybe not as much as we initially thought that it would. But clearly for some authorities, the gains are significant. So Birmingham, we'll see later that their gains are really quite significant. Smaller losses there losses in counties and unitaries, because very few of those types of authority got any recovery grant. Transitional support funding floors, we must make sure we don't call it damping. It is a funding floor that's being that you're getting. So we're trying to change our terminology and just mind how we describe things. So the floors are more generous. There's real terms protection for recovery grant over 3 years, 95% protection rather than 93% protection for those who are most above their funding targets. If we apply the new funding floors, actually it doesn't shift that much money, and the impact, as we'll see, the funding floors are more expensive, but the reason for that is not particularly actually about the level at which they're set. It's about the amount of funding that's underneath the floor that needs to be funded that drives the cost. So we'll see here the cost of the funding floors is pretty significant. In our modelling, it rises to £780 million by year 3, with very big increases, very, very large amounts of funding in there for those authorities that are more than 15% above target, both upper tier and lower tier, accounting for the bulk of that funding. The recovery grant guarantee is not particularly expensive, actually. Obviously, it does pick up some authorities who receive recovery grant currently, but it's not that significant in the scheme of the overall transitional support package. No funding floor payments for shire counties or for any county unitaries. But some of the payments are really quite significant, especially in the London and particularly for the City of London. £124 million the city is forecast to receive in 2028-29. So I don't know whether they're going to go back and look at some of those payments, especially for some of the extreme outliers like the city. But the impact of some of these changes since the summer is to create a much bigger cliff edge going into 29-30. That's the point at which the 3-year settlement ends. We'll have a new spending review at that point and possibly a new government as well. So that leaves a big inheritance for whoever's doing the next update in the funding settlements. Quite a lot of authorities, quite a long way above their funding targets, and that presents quite a problem. So particularly for shire districts and for inner London, we estimate shire districts are about £328 million above their funding target. That's about 10%. For inner London, it's even bigger, 558 million, about 12%. In cash terms, it's quite sizable for metropolitan authorities, about 400 million, but it's only about 2.3% above target, mostly driven by the cliff edge created by the continuing recovery grant. So that does create a problem, and it suggests that, well, first of all, there is still considerable damping in the system by year 3. So we haven't got everybody to their targets by year 3. There's quite a lot of damping in there, and I use the word damping quite consciously there because I think ministers didn't want to repeat what happened in 2013-14, where damping was frozen for over a decade. But the danger with the proposals that I've got is that that's exactly what will happen. We'll have a lot of damping frozen in the system in 28-29. I think a really important issue for authorities at this point, and particularly for me as well, I'm very conscious of this. We're just over a week away from the settlement. You're using the model to inform your budget plans and your budget reports, which will have, I know many of you, they'll be published this week or next week, on some of you earlier in the month as well. You want to be as sure as possible about how confident you can be about the numbers. Some of you will be aware that MHCLG has informally advised you of what your 3-year increase in core spending power is in pounds millions or in percent, and I've some of those have been shared with me, but 16 authorities, and I've compared those to the numbers that are in our model. And as you'll see there, I think in the middle of that distribution, and I just should stress this isn't representative, you know, and there are other changes that will come down the line. But I think in the middle of that pack, you can see that for quite a few authorities, our 3-year forecast is fairly close to the number that's been advised to the authorities. And they're largely the shire counties, county unitaries in particular. They seem to be particularly close. There are some bigger variances you see on the right-hand side there for some inner and outer London Mets and inner and outer London boroughs, and the one Met that we've got about 2.5%. And I'm talking to a couple of those about what that variance might arise from. But as you can see, there's quite a distribution there. Some are a little bit above, some are a little bit below, which kind of suggests that possibly the quantum is probably possibly about right. But I think there's just not enough data to draw any firm conclusions. So I think really bear that in mind when you're using our forecast, that, you know, even though we're very close to settlement, there's still some elements we just don't know yet, and which will change the outcome of the settlement when it's actually announced next week. Now, just to finish off, we'll just run through some kind of archetypes really to show you what the new numbers look like. So starting off with Birmingham, which this shows you the change in the 2028 core spending power figure in the policy statement, our modelling following the policy statement compared to our modelling following the June consultation. And you can see that a really huge increase in core spending power in our forecasts for Birmingham. So an increase of, you know, over £300 million, 17.5%. But you'll see that the bulk of that, 171 million, comes from using the new weighted RNFs. So that big increase in funding share that derives from the new children's RNF principally. You'll see as well a relatively large increase in cash terms, at least 72 million from the new quantum, the 1.9 billion pounds increase in quantum that we're modelling. But someone like Birmingham, they're gaining from pretty much every proposal that's come forward since the summer. You can see there a 27.8 million pound increase from different Bandier assumptions. Actually, I was going to point out was the 24.3 million pound increase from continuing recovery grant. Birmingham gets 39 million pounds, but obviously when the 600 million pound recovery grant was being rolled into SFA, Birmingham got a larger share of that. So the net gain by year 3 for Birmingham from continuing recovery grant is about 24 million pounds. So it's probably about 2/3 of the actual recovery grant value that it's receiving. Blackpool is an authority that I might have assumed would have done better. It does relatively well from the proposals overall, but obviously you can see here it's lost quite heavily from the new weighted relative needs formula by 30 million pounds. So it's gained on all the other changes, but the impact of that, the new weighted RNF, is to reduce the overall core spending power by 10 million pounds. That's a reduction of 3.8%. So that's quite a significant change. And even though Blackpool has still got the highest IMD score, 43.5, you know, it has got it's been badly affected by that new children's relative needs form. That's quite a big material reduction. Hounslow continues to fly high. It had a very large increase in the June proposals, and that continues to go even higher in the policy statement, partly from the higher quantum, but particularly from the new weighted RNF. So a lot of that's driven by the increase in its share of the weighted RNF. Now looking at a couple of a district council, North West Leicestershire, as we highlighted earlier, gains 8.8 million pounds from the new business rate income measure. And you can see there that our core spending power forecast for North West Leicestershire in June was 24.9 million. It's now 34.3. So there's been a huge 9.3 million pound increase in core spending power as a result of all the changes that have come through, principally business rates income measurement. So that's a huge change, and it's only when you see the cash starting and cash finishing position that you realise what the change is. If you just look at the cuts in funding within the 3-year package, it actually looks like North West Leicestershire is losing 95%, but in reality 95% of its business rate pooling gains are being preserved by the funding floor. Have a quick look at Westmoreland and Furness. We noted them earlier on as an authority losing very heavily from the remoteness adjustment. It's losing for quite a number of other things as well. Only a small increase in the quantum, but a big reduction from the new weighted RNFs, so resulting in quite a big cut in its core spending power. So you can really see the impact there that removing remoteness has an authority like Westmoreland and Furness. Hertfordshire, just an example of a high tax base, low need Shire County Council, a small increase, but the increase in quantum of about 39 million is almost entirely wiped out by the selection of other changes that we've made to our modelling and decisions that ministers announced in the policy statement. So you can see that's pretty static. So you can see there's a whole range of different experiences for different types of authority. Not everybody's up because of the quantum changes, been some quite big reductions as well. So before I hand over to Mark, one last slide, which is looking at next steps. Provisional settlement, we don't know, but it's very likely to be the 17th of December. So that's next Wednesday. One of the most popular days for a settlement, Wednesday. So that looks like the most likely day. On the day briefing will come out on that day, short, but in the evening of the day of the provisional settlement, and we'll be focusing a lot on the variances between the settlement and our modelling, and then we'll update the MTFP model as soon as we can after that, and we'll certainly aim to do that before Christmas. Potential for further lobbying, it's pretty limited now, certainly pre-provisional settlement. Everything's locked down, it's difficult to change it before then, but there are some issues I think that some authorities could probably do some work on and come back on in the consultation period after the provisional. Removing remoteness from the area cost adjustment, I think, is possibly the one that's got the most legs. I'm not sure of the justification for fully removing it from everything apart from adult social care. That wasn't in the consultation. The use of the DACI within the children's RNF has had some really quite odd results. Authorities might want to challenge whether that was fully consulted on in advance. The recovery grant we've talked about in quite a bit of detail, and then the transition, its cost and its calculation. I think some authorities will want to query how that's done and whether that should be more generous to them. So there we are. Mark, I will hand over to you. I will hand over to you now.
Thanks, Adrian. I'll just whilst Mark's teeing up his slides, and that's incredible. I only realised a couple of days ago, I used to be the 151 for a year at North West Leicestershire. I remember telling them the 8 million above base will disappear soon, and they said no, as it won't. And now it turns out they're probably right, because most of it will feed through. So that was really insightful, that stuff. So hopefully everybody found that useful. I'm going to pass to Mark now, just to by way of introduction. Mark's recently moved on from SITFA, where for the past 3 years he led the work on the collection fund, council tax and business rates for SITFA Financial Advisory Network. He's now self-employed, helps local authorities build and embed skills and knowledge needed to manage all of these things, business rates, collection fund, etc. Mark was also a member of the MHCLG Reset Implementation Working Group, so brings a lot of first-hand insight to the topic that he's about to take you through. I should say, Mark and I went through these slides yesterday, and I've done dabbled with business rates, both as a 151 and as someone doing collection fund, and it's heavy stuff. It's true the government is taking a lot of risk out of business rates, but it ain't taking any complexity out of it. So I'll pass you across to Mark, who hopefully will help you with some of that complexity. Over to you, Mark. Cheers.
Thanks, Tom. Hopefully, I think is the operative word of business rates, as always. It's nice to present this to you this morning. As I said, I've got about half an hour, I've got about 15 slides or so. And I'm going to talk through really what's happened over the last year in developing the proposals for updating business rates. Want to try and make it as practical as possible. So at the end, I really kind of sat back and thought, okay, then, well, given if I put myself in the position of a practitioner or a Section 151 officer, what are the things that I'd focus on? Because, you know, with business rates, quite often you can get lost within the kind of technical detail and forget really that there's some core messages that you can take away. So I'll finish on that, but I'll start with just kind of covering the objectives. And before we get into the objectives, where I started off with this year, when I was invited onto this implementation working group, I kind of looked at what MHCLG were trying to do and the timescale they were trying to do it in. I mean, they've got all the tax policy changes to deal with, the reset, the revaluation, alongside kind of the wider funding funding settlement. And I looked at this sort of 12 months ago and thought, there's a good chance that the business rate system will end up in an unmanageable mess at the end of this. And I put on the slide there what I really think MHCLG tried to do over the last 12 years. And before I get into the detail, I think it's worth just saying I think MHCLG have done a pretty good job. Now, you might disagree with me when I go through some of the proposals, but given what MHCLG were asked to do and the environment that they were asked to do it within, and the timescale they're asked to do it within, I think the proposals that they come up with are a real step forward. And I'll try and point out some of the changes and some of the improvements that I think are implicit within the the updates. Now, I'm not going to cover this slide because Adrian covered it. This is really, this is summarising what Adrian pointed. It's clear right from the start, commitment from MHCLG that they wanted that all the resources currently within the business rates retention system were going to remain with the local government sector. Now, there's an element of redistributive effect in there. The money, it's sort of the same totals in there, but it might go somewhere differently. But I'm not going to cover that because that's Adrian's covered that. What I am going to cover, that was baselines. I'm going to cover kind of another sort of baseline, really. We're on the transition baseline. And this really is the engine room for some of the changes and how MHCLG have operationalised the reset. And the thing, if you looked at anything to do with business rates, you'll have seen that graphic on the left, which is difference between business rates baselines and baseline funding level. And those are the two baselines that use as part of the national resource distribution system and resource allocation system in business rates. And the first one of these is your business rates baseline. And effectively what a business rates baseline is, it's the measure of your ability to generate business rates in your local area. And one of the things that MHCLG struggled with at the start of this process was because of all the tax policy changes, because of the reset, because quite frankly, we don't know with any great detail what property is in an RHL, is a retail, hospitality and leisure, which property is in a high value, So we didn't know at the start 12 months ago enough detail to be able to think through and accurately assess the business rates that's going to be collected from 26-27. And MHCLG have done a really good job in trying to get beyond some of the complexities that the tax policy changes have created. And it's really down to two key changes in how they define business rates. The first, for your business rates baseline going forward, what they're going to do, they're going to ignore the effect of business rates reliefs in setting your business rates baseline. So what they do, they call this the gross basis. They're going to determine your business rates baseline at a gross level before reliefs. Okay. Now, the effect of that is your business rates baseline is going to be higher, and therefore your tariffs are going to be higher, or your top-ups are going to be lower. Okay. Now, that's not something to be worried about, because I'll come on to an illustration on the next slide. The government will now fund all reliefs. The only reliefs that they won't fund are truly discretionary local reliefs, such as Localism Act stuff and the top-up elements of charitable relief. All the reliefs that previously weren't funded, partial, exempt, charitable, community amateur sports clubs, you're now going to get Section 31 funding for those. So you're going to get an increase in your tariff or a reduction in your top-up, but balanced by a change in Section 31 funding. Now, the second key principle that's driven some of the really clever things that MHCLG have done is they've separated billing from funding in the new business rate system. And really, in the new business rate system, what you bill a business is only relevant for cash flow purposes and for that business. What is relevant now for a local authority is the funding side of things. And from a funding point of view, all the businesses are going to be allocated either to a small or standard multiplier. They're going to ignore the 3 new multipliers, RHL and high value properties. Everything is going to be valued on a small or standard multiplier. Well, your business rates, retained business rates income, is simply going to be based on a small or the standard multiplier. And by doing that, they're removing from the equation all the uncertainties that exist around, well, which properties are going to fit into the new multipliers. Okay, and again, I've got an example to show you how that works. But it's a really clever technique to get over and simplify some of these the impact of these tax policy changes. Okay, so examples. You always want a worked example, don't you, in a presentation? This is example of the gross rates basis. This is calculating your business rates baselines on a gross rates basis. Now, if you look on the slide, start at the top, you've got the baseline funding level, which is £1 million. That's effectively your target, where you want to get to. And what you've got, starting on the left, you've got the authority and you've got rateable values at small and standard multipliers. Now, the old system was that what used to happen, you used to get the rateable values times by the multiplier to give you gross rates, and then you took off the relief values to get the figures in the right column, what's called the net collectible basis for business rates. And you can see, if you do that calculation, you come figuring the kind of salmon pink figure of about £2.878 million. Okay, that is your business rates baseline on a collectible rates basis. Now, that is £1.8 million above your baseline. So under the old system, you would pay a tariff of £1.8 million, reduce that income down to your baseline funding level of £1 million. That's how the old system worked. Okay, the new system, you need to kind of back up a bit and go left on the slide and ignore reliefs. The new system is just going to ignore reliefs, so you're going to get higher business rates baseline. In our case, 4.3 million or so. Okay, it ignores the effect of reliefs. Now, with a higher business rates baseline, you're going to get a bigger adjustment to get you down to your baseline funding level. In this case, it goes up by to 3.3 million. That illustrates the effect on your top-ups of tariff of this change. And you'll see that feeding through in the figures that come out of the finance settlement next week. Now, don't worry about it though. You've got to think about it from a funding perspective, because whilst you're paying a higher tariff, or if you're a top authority, you pay a lower top-up, the government is now going to fund all your reliefs. So you'll get additional Section 31 funding, which is at the bottom of the screen, bottom left. Okay, you've got net collectible of 2.878 million. That's the amount you bill to authorities. That's how much they're going to pay. You'll pay an increased tariff, but it'll be offset by increased Section 31 funding to leave you with your £1 million baseline funding level. That's the first effect that's you're going to see, both in the finance settlement and next year, part of the NMDR1, and as you go throughout the year. Now, I talked about separating funding from billing to try and deal with these three new multipliers. And this example brings in those new multipliers. So what I've done, you'll see I've kind of added in three new multipliers in the blue box, and I've randomly selected some figures for the gross rates for each of those multipliers. Now, the blue arrow is calculating for each of those three multipliers the difference between that multiplier and what the small or standard multiplier would be. Yeah, and what that is, that's the system now is going to treat that as cash that you've collected, if you've say had high value multiplier, which is the bottom one, you're collecting an extra 3p above the standard multiplier for those properties that's in the high value property category. And if you've got a discount, so you've got the 25p discounts from the retail, hospitality and leisure multiplier, you're effectively collecting less than you should for those in a cash basis compared to a small or standard multiplier. And what the system does now is effectively, you'll see, because of those additional supplements or additional discounts in the arrow column, you're collecting a net of £49,000 more than you would if you'd have stayed on the old small and standard multiplier approach. Okay, so you got £49,000 more than you would do if you just valued it all at small and standard multiplier. And what you do, you can see down on the funding calculations, the government then will take that off you as a reduction in your Section 31 grants. Okay, so you can see in the funding calculations, your net collectible has gone up by £49,000 because of these supplements and discounts. Your tariff stays the same. You pay a Section 31 grant for that supplements and discounts back to government, and that's going to be calculated as part of your NNDR1 and NNDR3. It's effectively just going to be rolled in as part of a Section 31 grant, and all that does, that just leaves your funding, if you use it on the old, if funding is on standard and small multiplier, billing is on all the other multipliers, and you settle up the difference between small and standard and all the multipliers for a Section 31 grant. So really, really clever way of dealing with the complexity of the tax policy impacts on business rates. Now, talk about baseline funding levels. This is the key thing that I'm a bit uncertain about. There's an area of this that I think Adrian talked about. There's one or two areas that you still need to get a bit of detail on, and there's something in baseline funding levels that you do need to, that's still a little unclear. But anyway, what are baseline funding levels? Well, it's the post-reset starting position. The design of the system is designed so that on the 1st of April next year, after paying your tariff or receiving your top up, you should have your baseline funding level. Okay, unfortunately, as the slide says, of course, they're not available yet. They're still being worked on. I've seen the MHCLG methodology. They're almost there. They will be available by next Wednesday or whatever the finance settlement is announced. Okay, once they're set, your baseline funding level at the start of the reset period, they won't change. All they're going to be is updated by CPI. Okay, so once you've got it, you're stuck with it. Okay, and the entire change in your baseline funding level will be brought in year one. Okay, they're not going to be, I shouldn't say damped, it's not going to be stepped in. Your change in baseline funding is going to be brought in 100% in year one, but of course, as Adrian mentioned, there are transitional protections that include a reference to 25-26 business rates income for transitional protection purposes. So key principles on your baseline funding level, how they're going about determining that. As Adrian said, the key principle is they want all resources, business rates resources, to remain with local government. Okay, under indexation has been rolled into RSG. The rest of the business rates resources have been rolled into your baseline funding. Okay, so that includes growth, but it also includes, when you read the policy paper, existing funded reliefs. What effectively they've done, remember I talked about they're going to ignore reliefs in calculating your business rates baseline. In calculating your baseline funding level, they've taken away all the cost of the reliefs nationally, but then they've added back in to your baseline funding level the cost of the relief, or the funding for the reliefs that HMT has previously decided and approved that it will fund. Now, that's great because it works on a national level. Okay, it provides space and a headroom to afford the expansion in relief funding that the gross rates basis will generate. But I worry that it's going to be hard to operationalize that at a local level. What do I mean by that? Because they've removed all reliefs from your baseline funding level, then only added back a subset which has previously been funded. My concern here is that what you're going to be faced with is a situation of some reliefs are going to be outside your baseline funding and some reliefs are going to be inside your baseline funding. So that when you get to your budget and you say, great, I've got my baseline funding level, trying to tie that back to the budget lines in your budget so you know specifically what lines, what your baseline funding level is and how it reconciles to your budget isn't going to be as straightforward as I hoped it would be. Now, I'm willing to be wrong on that. I hope I am wrong, but I suspect I'm not. Okay, so it's going to be complex, this tiny baseline funding to your budget. I've talked about this a number of times. Section 31 grants are now going to become what I think they're almost like the Swiss Army knife of the business rates retention system. If there's a change in the business rates retention system, it's largely driven by Section 31. Okay, and Section 31, just to confirm, they're now going to fund almost all reliefs, charity, community and sports clubs, all these things that previously created a reduction in your business rates because it was a relief. You're now going to get offsetting Section 31 grants. Okay, that's going to improve the stability of the system. Okay, one thing that we're awaiting is because of the quantum in Section 31 grants is going to rise significantly. MHCLG are going to bring in legislations to bring Section 31 grants. They're formally going to define Section 31 grants as part of non-domestic rating income. And you're going to recognise the business rates retention system Section 31 grants within your collection fund rather than your CIS. It's a big change. Okay, you need to be aware of. Okay, now that does improve stability, and I'll come on to that on the next slide. It will also change cash flows. 100% of the Section 31 grants are going to go to the billing authorities, yeah, and you're going to distribute the Section 31 grants to the major precepting authorities from the collection fund. So you need to be speaking to the major precepting authorities. Understand that cash flows will change under this new system as well. Okay, the final point on that slide, just a little caveat. Until I've been given assurances that MHCLG will bring out the regulations to allow you to bring Section 31 grants into collection fund before you formally have to do this. Okay, because until the regulations are enacted, there's no legislative basis for putting Section 31 grants in your collection fund. MHCLG have assured me that the regulations will be out early in January. So just want to keep an eye on for that. This just illustrates the move to gross rates basis. I'm not going to go through this in any great detail. The top of this slide just illustrates the current system, which basically says movements in relief which aren't Section 31 funded create deficits. Movements in Section 31 grants that are movements in reliefs that are Section 31 funded creates timing differences. And one of the things that MHCLG have done is have realised that increasing Section 31 funding without doing something can create increased timing differences. That's why they're moving the Section 31 grants into the collection fund, and you'll see the effect of it on the bottom box on that screen. Effectively, where you've got changes in funded relief now, nothing changes. Your relief goes up, it increases the deficit, increased Section 31 comes into the collection fund to offset it. Okay, so the change to bring Section 31 grants into the collection fund should improve stability overall. Just a reminder that the business rates baselines are going to be based on a draft rateable values. And just as with the other revaluations in 2017 and 2023, all the rateable values are going to be updated to the actual rateable values as at the 1st of April, and there's going to be corrections made to the top-ups and tariffs as part of the following finance year's settlement. So there will be a technical adjustment to your top-up and tariff to correct to the right gross rateable values at the 1st of April, and it'll be included in the 27-28 finance settlement. As usual, you then need to accrue that back into 26-27. Okay. Now, for the majority of councils, it's not large. It's a few tens of £1,000s, but not always. You can see on the table on the slide, it can be quite large. Okay. Just one to be aware of. Your collection fund team should be aware of this. Again, the same process is going to operate. And as you say, this is a calculation of your business rates baseline. As you can see, gross rates is likely to change because of the technical adjustments. It's updated the values. Designated areas, because that's got a baseline in there, their baselines are going to be updated to correct for the rateable values, and the renewable energy baselines are going to be updated to correct for the updated final rating list as well. Things that are not going to change are appeal loss, bad debt, and cost of collection. Okay, you'll notice there appeal loss. For appeal loss and bad debt, they are going to be top-down allocations of a national quantum, and the bad debt is on 0.6% of your gross rates payable. Appeal loss, they don't publish this figure, but if you look in the OMB, what is it, budget management report, they say that the national appeal percentage is 3.75% that we're allowed for. So there you go. Okay, moving on to disregards. I'm conscious of time, but we'll get there. We'll finish in a few minutes. MHCLG, I think, have realised that the current design of the disregard system, where baselines are set in legislation and the design of the baselines are set in legislation, don't really work well with resets. So there is going to be an exercise during the year to try and work out and update how disregard areas work with tax policy changes. Okay, but outside of that, big picture stuff, for disregards, they're exempt from the reset. If you've got growth in your disregard, and that's renewables and designated areas, you retain it. Okay, the only thing that's going to be updated is your baselines for the revaluation, and that's a normal process. Okay, similar thing, the same supplements and discounts approach will apply to designated areas. Okay, but slight difference in that there's going to be a nil floor to this grant settlement for supplements. So if you've collected a lot of 5p supplements for your high value properties that normally you'd have to pay back to central government, if that would result in a net negative adjustment for the supplements and discounts, it's subject to a nil floor. Okay. And other one, next one, I think is going to be interesting, because government has not been able to update the basis of calculating the baselines for designated areas. Is still on a net rates basis, which means outside of, well, within designated areas, you won't be grant funded for the reliefs that up until now haven't been grant funded. So cash, charitable, property, empty properties, they aren't being grant funded because the funding for that is built into your baselines already, because your baselines in designated areas are on a net rates basis, not a gross rates basis. Okay. Final point on that slide, just to let you know, the government's confirmed. So I know some councils have struggled with some free-put areas asking for their share of under indexation. Of course, under indexation is being reset, so it doesn't affect this year, but they've taken the opportunity to confirm in the policy paper that under indexation, if it happens in the past, is not a disregard. And what they've done is they've rolled indexation into RSG. So just, you know, that's something just for you to be aware of if you've got that sort of discussion going on in future with free ports and investment zones. Safety net and levy, we're going to cover in, I'm going to finish in 5 minutes. This is all changing. Your levy is going to be based on a marginal levy rate, and it will apply to all authorities. Okay, so previously only tariff authorities paid levy. Now all authorities will pay a levy on growth. So if you're a top-up authority, you need to start planning for that. Numbers, well, you can see what I did. I took the 24-25 growth and slotted them into the new levy rates. You can see initial growth is 10% and whatever it is. Bottom line, more councils will pay levy, but overall the levy rate will be less, particularly in the first years following the reset. Good news, safety net is being increased to 100% of baseline funding level in the first year, simply because of all the uncertainty around it at the moment. So once you know your baseline funding level, that will be guaranteed in 26-27. Your safety net threshold is 100%. It will scale back over the course of the settlement, but for the first year, given the uncertainty, it's guaranteed at baseline funding level. Okay. Talk about practicalities here. I've just got 2 or 3 slides on the practicalities. Budget impact. Don't forget, step away from all the technicalities. What you put in your NNDR1 is still what you should be budgeting for. Okay, the statutory overrides still apply, so try and get your budget as close as possible to your NNDR1. Okay, start thinking about how you're going to change your models, your budget, your working papers to bring Section 31 grants into the collection fund. Okay, and you've got that basic equation, budget at baseline on the 1st of April, growth or decline occurs after that. Because you need to, the idea is budget from baseline as at 1st of April, granularity in your budget is going to matter. You need to be able to track and reconcile your baseline funding level to the lines in your budget to agree your starting point is correct. Okay. Don't forget you're going to get technical adjustments throughout the year. So you need to forecast what are real variances from those that are going to be generated and then corrected by technical adjustments later in the year. And top-up authorities, levy may need to be budgeting for. When you're completing your NNDR1, bear in mind the national top-down allocations that have been included in your baseline. Now, clearly, this shouldn't drive what's in your NNDR1, these percentages. But if your percentages that you're using in your NNDR1 to produce your appeal, loss and bad debt are hugely different than what's been used to create your business rates baseline, you're effectively building in a different funding position and you won't get your baseline funding. Okay, so just bear that in mind when you're producing your NNDR1. Okay, and growth, we've talked about growth being, funding now is on a small and standard multiplier. Okay, the one thing I would say about growth is it happens in every single reset, and particularly, now you really need to be careful and keep an eye out for likely changes in your gross rates position immediately after the reset. Because once, 1st of April, any changes in the rateable value in the rates list will be corrected via a technical update up until the 1st of April. After that, any changes, something closes, you're stuck with it. Excuse me. And it has created issues with local authority funding in the past. Final thing before we're on to come on to a final slide about Section 151. I'm hearing stories from the field that the system suppliers are focusing quite rightly at the moment on getting billing patches installed. Clearly what you want, that's absolutely right, but you also need your systems to be patched so they can produce NNDR1s on the new basis as well. So if you are involved in producing your NNDR1, just speak to your revenue systems team, check where they are up to with implementing the NNDR1 patch in your system. Headline messages for Section 151 officers. Business rates retention system funding stays in the sector, just redistributed somewhat. And if you've got, that means if you've got a gain in the current system, you're going to be a gainer in the new system after transition with transition relief. Okay, you perhaps need to manage the expectations and presentation to do with your budget, because the budget presentation will look different because of the changes in top-ups and tariffs and Section 31 grants. Don't worry though. The system, the fundamental design of the system gives you time to respond to budget variances. The system is designed so that whatever you put in your NNDR1 from business rates perspective, you'll get at year end in your general fund. It will give you a few months to react to changes. If you do get large gross rateable value changes immediately after the reset, I would consider speaking to the MHCLG if that basically you get a significant fall in your business rates and it's likely to put your stability at risk. I've been pleasantly surprised speaking to MHCLG at how cognizant they are of the risk around large falls in value immediately after a reset. Okay, so if you are in a situation where you get a power station close a week after the reset, consider speaking to the MHCLG. And for designated areas, perhaps as an element, you need to perhaps be communicating some of these changes. The fact that MHCLG is going to do a review in the year, not going to be a full review, but there is going to be a review on the operation of the system in the new year, and they do operate on a different basis. They're not going to get the same level of Section 31 grants because the baselines are going to still be based on a net rates basis. If you are kind of struggling with all of this, and I struggle with it as well, don't worry. One of the things that I'm here to do really is kind of offer some support, and I am, that's why I'm self-employed now, because I enjoy doing this sort of stuff. So if you are struggling to kind of get to the bottom and understand the implications of this, more than happy to come and have a chat with you about it. My offering, what I will do and what I offer is on the screen. But even before that, if you want half an hour, I'm more than happy to, pop on a Teams call and try and explore some of these things with you. So take the opportunity if you feel it'd be useful. That's my last slide, Dan, so I'll hand back to you.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Mark, and thanks, Adrian. How many people have you heard say they really enjoy technical business rates? You've got to be really special to do that. But Mark knows his stuff. I can attest to that. So thank you both. It went over a bit. Apologies for that, guys. Really, really technical stuff, but really important stuff a week out from, or a week and a day out from the settlement. And we think it'd be next Wednesday. I don't know, Adrian, if you've seen a couple of things in the chat, and Mark as well, you've seen a few things in the chat, but so we'll cover those now for those of you who can stay on. But I open the floor also to you guys. Is there anything you'd like to know, any feedback, any questions you have, anything that strikes you from either of those two presentations? So just raise your hand if there's something you'd like to say or a question you'd like to ask. And Mark, straight in there.
I'm following up on a few of the questions in chat, to be honest. So what I've got is, there's a lot on pooling. I'll give you my thoughts on pooling, but in a second. But I'll answer the question on NNDR1. I've seen a draft NNDR1. I think MHC and DeepG have done a really good job in designing the NNDR1. I expect it to be out this Friday or Monday. Good news is it's a lot simpler than it was. It's now down to 3 columns from the 6, and effectively all it does is it asks you to collect information on the new tax policy multipliers at a gross rates basis, and it does all the clever calculations and produces your business rates, not for the rest of the information, just using the old 3-column approach rather than not even small and standard multiplier. So it's really a good simplification. I expect that to be out Friday or Monday, I think. And pooling, oh well. I mean, reading between the lines, there's a lot of frustration with pooling, and I probably share your view, to be honest. And if I'm honest, MHCLG knows the information is coming out far too late to take action on it. Well, and Martin is right. I want to cover airports in a second, to be honest. Yeah, Martin's absolutely right. Pooling at the moment, I mean, I think it's going to be, once you see the mechanisms for, for what's missing at the moment for me is the calculation of retained rates for the way on which you're going to pay levy. Until you see what reliefs are inside and outside of your baseline funding level, I think it's just difficult to try and do, which is frustrating, because when you actually look at the total levy that was actually paid and the total levy that would have been paid without pooling for 24-25, there are huge gains nationally from it. So I'm frustrated with everyone else with pooling, but it's just everything is coming out a bit too late and a bit too hurried to make a decision, I think.
I liked Holly's approach. Basically, say yes to a pool, and if you don't like it, you can always withdraw later. And so there's something in that in tactical terms. I think the other way of looking at it, Mark, probably is to say, we'll take a look, and if we feel we could do a pool in 27, 28, then maybe we can hold back some of the income in 26, 27, and then go ahead as you used to be once you're more familiar with the numbers.
Martin's made a really good point, and it is something that is absolutely, when you look at the draft rating list that came out in September, I looked at it, and you can see Hillingdon, Crawley, Luton, Uttlesford, and you thought, what have they got in common? I mean, they've all got airports, and Heathrow was already the largest ratepayer in Europe, and their rates bill, it looks like, to have gone up by about 300%. And it's a huge risk when you're completing the NNDR1, because if you've got a single ratepayer that's now paying you £300 million or whatever Heathrow does in a year, you've got an appeals percentage of 3.75% allowed in your baselines. How are you going to square that?
So will they be put straight into the safety net, Mark, if Heathrow appeals and gets a whopping great reduction?
I'm guessing Hillingdon... so. But remember, they've got TR as well. So I'd love Hillingdon. I mean, there's one NNDR1 I want to see is Hillingdon's NNDR1 and the transitional relief figure in it. It'd be the world's biggest transitional relief figure. But and Martin, there's a really good point around for authorities that you're considering appeals provisions. Be aware of the changes in valuations that are coming on for those sectors.
Spare a thought as well, Mark, for the for Luton, because they own the airport, so they pay the increased business rates as well as take the risk on the business rate side. So
but you had Luton as the biggest gainer, didn't you, Adrian?
Yeah, I thought I saw Dev come into the meeting earlier. I'm not sure if Dev's still here. Yeah, Luton looked like the biggest gainers on the fair funding side. So they deserve it.
Is it so? We've got another one here. Is increased provision for appeals are more likely to be in a safety net position? No, not in the first year, because you guaranteed safety net is at 100% of your baseline funding level in the first year. Now, you then ask question, what is an outside? We don't know exactly what's in your baseline funding level yet. But the principle is you guarantee the baseline funding level in the first year. Beyond that, I think it'll roll back to standard safety net. But for the first year, no council should be in a actual safety net position, because you guaranteed your baseline funding level or your safety net, a top up to your baseline funding level via your safety net.
just a question if Lindsay's still on, or if North West Leicestershire or Rugby or any of the super gainers from business rates. Are you guys surprised then? You've done a lot better in Adrian's slide earlier with North West Leicestershire, the 8 million gain when compared with the summer consultation. That must be a heck of a relief for those districts that have got massive gains, and for those who've never really gained much, a bit of a kicking maybe. Are you still there, Lindsay? Is that something that you'd anticipated?
I don't. Yeah. Yeah. I think it's almost like we just can't quite believe it. It's just almost just ridiculous that we're about 4.5 million better off than we thought we would be.
Wow. And you don't believe it until you see it next week.
No,
is what you say.
No, I know. Yeah. We just keep checking Adrian's model, just making sure nothing's changed, and that we are really, it is really looking that it is really there. That figure is, what we're seeing. So it is a huge relief. But yeah, let's just hope that when the figures come out next week, that it's there. It's what we think, what we're hoping for. Yeah.
and presumably, Adrian, that'd be hard for them to change now, having because that for me, when I was at North West Leicestershire, said, look, you will lose this gain. You won't lose 5% of it, you lose 100%, and that's like Lindsay. We budgeted for some massive losses, maybe some of it damps away, but not. But there's nothing that will change probably now. Is that
I don't think so, Dan. No, I don't think so. I mean, I think there's been a bit of pushback to the BR team and I think to the grant distribution team as well about the way they've done the business rate measurement. I mean, there are issues with it. I mean, if you're a district council with high growth in a pool, you're not complaining, but I mean, there are some technical, drawbacks to the way they've done that, but they're not. I'm pretty sure they're not going to back away from that. In fact, I'm absolutely certain that they're not going to, and that's just the effect that it has. So I think it's pretty much baked in. I think there were a couple of issues though. One is that about credibility, both for us and for Lindsay. If you've been telling members for 5, 6, 7, 8 years that when they reset the baseline, you're gonna lose out, and then you don't. That's not always an easy message to hand over, and also it puts places like Cherwell way above their funding target going into 29-30, and you could say, oh, that's another risk, but I suspect actually it's not that much of a risk. You've just built in an awful lot of additional funding that is difficult to take off you even in 3 years' time. So it's got a double benefit.
They are thinking. And one of the things MHC LG are going to consult on and work with the sector over the next year is the frequency of resets. Look, sometime in the new year, you're probably going to get something to kind of invitation to express views on how frequently you want resets to occur. But as I say, whether that's a full reset or a reset with transitional retention, as in the current system, you don't know.
Yeah, but the problem, Mark, is that I was going to say the problem is that for someone like Cherwell or North West Leicestershire, they're a long way above their funding target now. And then they're going to grow again for the next 3 years. Some of those authorities hugely. There could be another few £1 million above the funding target again. Transitioning them anywhere is that's a 10-year job, not a 3-year job.
Question about designated areas that was scrolled up around. Is it possible to summarise the changes around designated areas clearly? It's always difficult summarising business rate stuff clearly, isn't it? I'll see if I can see what I've got, but it is quite technical, and the issue with designated areas is because they don't play nicely with a reset, because the baselines are set in legislation, so you can't update the baselines. You retain growth, but the basis on which you set your deadline and baselines are also set in regulations, so you can't move from a net to a gross basis. So that's going to drive some of the issues around. You don't get some grant funding in designated for reliefs in designated areas. So I'll see what I've got, but it's I don't think there's much around yet. I'm hoping that they might, publish something in the guidance notes to the NNDR1, to be honest, that might explain that.
Yeah.
Thanks, Matt. There's a lot on pooling. I noticed Jane talking about Lancashire and 100%. Does that mean, Jane, that you're going to let Lancaster back into the pool, Lancashire pool, with Heysham Power Station? Because we were always kicked. I used to be 151 at Lancaster. We were always kicked out because of Heysham Power Station. But
yeah, they said it was the power station, Dan. It wasn't. It was you.
It was a risk-based decision, was it, Adrian?
It was.
Yeah. But I think that just demonstrates, doesn't it, the difficulties in terms of sort of getting everyone to come to some agreement on how a new pool would work, specifically the sharing of risk and reward, and getting an agreement and a new MOU round all the sort of pool members. That takes time. The deadline for the preferences to be submitted and all of the uncertainty is just quite crazy, really, isn't it?
yeah.
So we will see. We will all see.
Brilliant. And yeah, Adrian thought someone mentioned LGI. Did you think it'd be Chris?
I knew it'd be Chris.
Adrian.
I knew it'd be Chris that would mention LGI. Yeah.
But those two things are linked, Chris, aren't they? Growth in business rates and reserves, because when I look at reserve levels, it tends to be the authorities with the highest reserve levels are districts, and the authorities within districts with higher reserve levels are those that have done really well out of business rates, and we're waiting to have all of that taken away from them, so built the reserves up to build resilience, and now it seems that not all of it's been taken away from them. So I think you'll see, I was predicting a massive reduction in some district reserves for the likes of the Cherwells and Office Leicesters, the Rugbys, etc., the super gainers, and now I don't think I'll see that. And for those of you who've never really gained very much from business rates and our district, I suspect that'll be quite a hard pill to swallow.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. I was just going to add that. So the super gainer in Kent is Dartford, and they've obviously done really well out of this, and they're sitting on reserves of around 40 million, which is larger than Medway, which is a neighbouring unitary. So this is slightly in jest and tongue in cheek, but when we're having conversations about who should be funding the LGR costs, I just say, well, we should start the whole thing. So
yeah, and it's Mark, we've discussed this, haven't we, and Adrian? When we used to work with Neil Ben, and I used to say, Neil, can you do all your figures to 4 decimal points? Because I work with a little district and they mean something. And I just go, no, I'm not bothered. It's 1 decimal point. But this is it. It balances at a national level. Yeah. But these funny little districts that gain 8 million, that 8 million is chicken feed at a national level. But between the districts, any district gaining or losing 8 million, it would be massive. So I do wonder if it's the degree to which the officials really understand the magnitude of some of those what are nationally small changes to districts where they are absolutely massive.
It felt with the BRS income measurement change that it just felt like it was done very late. And I think if they'd had more time, they might have come up with something that was a little bit more nuanced. I mean, maybe looked at the pooling agreements to see what the usual split was between districts and counties, or maybe done something in terms of the way that it was rolled in that gave something to everybody.
They just don't collect that information at MHCLG, enough information. They just have no basis to estimate pooling gain at all, or the effect of pooling, because they just don't collect it.
Yeah.
So you think it was a stability thing then? They were afraid that by not bringing it in as they did like there would be some that would drop really.
I know from discussions with the business rates team, they've been pretty. I mean, they've been very consistent throughout this entire process that what they wanted was they had an undertaking that the resources within the business rate system would stay within local government. You know, but the issue is at this late stage, it's just a lot less redistributed than we thought it was going to be.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
So
I think that the other principle, Mark, was they were saying that they wanted to make sure that everyone, the baseline reflected the actual position they were in 25, 26. So that's why they wanted to put the pooling gains back in. But I think the issue is that, say, Northwest Leicestershire, they didn't get all the pooling gains. I don't know what the MOU would have said there, but I'd be surprised if it was more than 50%.
They didn't.
You know, so they're actually been put on a level that's higher than where they were, or where they are in the current year, which is not the principle that they were intending to follow. So to that extent, they haven't followed what they said they've done. I think they've taken a shortcut. Maybe, I mean, to be fair, they've had so much to do. It must have been the least of their worries. But I think if you'd taken more time over it and looked at it over the summer, consulted on some options, I don't think we'd have ended up with districts getting all of the pooling gains. I think it would have been shared in a different way. But we are where we are, and I think we're done. Yeah.
Really interesting. Right, well, we're nearly at 11:30. I think we've picked up anything. We'll have a look through the chat afterwards as well and get in touch if we've missed out on stuff. So thanks
Just
everyone who's go on, sorry, Adrian.
So do you want to take a sweepstake about whether Martin and the GLA gets to agree their settlement before next week's settlement? What do you reckon, Dan?
Oh, what's my part?
It's not agreed yet, but he's expecting to have it done before the settlement next week, which is good.
Excellent. Brilliant. So thank you everybody for staying on. Thank you especially to both Adrian and Mark for really excellent presentations. I had put in the thing that I do something on the tax base, but having heard Adrian's and Mark's, I knew that was much more important. So I probably will do a bonus EP, which I'll send out, which is I'll waffle on about the 25 tax base, send some pretty grass, which we'll send out when we send out the recording. But I felt it was really important to get these two presentations. So thank you all. Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Adrian. And we'll see you again in about a week and a bit's time after the settlement, where we'll do another session, won't we, Adrian?
We will, definitely.
Brilliant. Thank you, everyone, and cheers. Goodbye.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Okay, thanks very much. Bye.